Hi, hello everybody. Miss being there with you guys. I wanted to make this video to go over how to do a cladogram using a matrix. So I'm going to share my screen. You guys can work along with me. This should be posted in your Google Classroom, so you can work along with me as I talk. Or you can just listen and then work through it yourself later as practice. Well, let me put my little self over here. Okay, so you can see on the screen the cladogram practice slides, right? So first we're going to use this matrix, and the matrix is really just like a table where you track traits, whether a creature has a trait or not, or sometimes you would be dealing with amino acid sequence differences. And we'll talk about that in the next slide when we practice that one. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at each of the creatures and we're going to say, okay, does this creature have or not have this, trait, right? This characteristic. So we're going to start with the rabbit. Does the rabbit have fur? It does have fur. So we're going to put a plus sign in that box. Does the rabbit have 4 limbs? It does. So we're putting a plus sign there. Does the rabbit have a long tail? No. So we're putting a minus in that one. Now let's look at the lemur. Okay, the lemur, it has fur, plus sign. It has 4 limbs, plus sign. It has also a long tail, plus sign. So it has all 3 of the traits here. Let's look at our frog. Frog doesn't have fur, so we're going to put a minus sign. It does have 4 legs, so we're going to put a plus sign in there. It does not have a long tail, so we're putting a minus sign. And then we come to the eel. The eel doesn't have fur. It does not have 4 limbs. And it also doesn't have a long tail. Its body is long and skinny. It doesn't really have a tail per se. That's all of it. All of that is its body. So it's not really a tail. So we're saying the eel has none of the traits. The lemur has all of the traits, and then the other ones are somewhere in between. And that's going to help us, figure out which one of these creatures evolved more in the more ancient past, right? So when you get your matrix done, you can see that we can sort of categorize our creatures according to what traits they have. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to find my outgroup. My outgroup is the creature that doesn't have any of the traits. Okay, so here's my creature who doesn't have any of the traits. That's the eel. So that means the eel is the outgroup of this set of creatures. And since it still is alive today, I want to make sure that all of my creatures end up in a line at the top because they all are still alive today. So I'm going to put my eel first. I think he's the most ancient since he doesn't have any of the traits that are on my list. And the lemur has all of the traits, so I'm going to go ahead and move my lemur right up here to the end of my little timeline, okay, and say that his branch branched off the last, so he's the one who's going to have all of the traits. The rabbit has 2 of the traits, so I'm going to put the rabbit between the lemur and the frog, and the frog has 1 of the traits, so I'm putting the frog in between the eel and the rabbit. Then I'm going to just arrange my little branches so that they're going from the main timeline to my creatures. I'm just going to drag them over and adjust them so that they look good, look right. Putting those there. So this one I need to change up a little bit. All right, there's my rabbits. And I don't really need this one because this one is pointing right towards my lemur already. So I'm just deleted that last little diagram line, right? Okay, so now I have all of my creatures in the order that I think works, right? Because this one has all of the traits, This has none of the traits. And now I need to label along the timeline when the traits evolved. So, for example, let's start with our 4 limbs. So this trait of having 4 limbs, it evolved somewhere between when the eel branched off of this ancestral tree and when the frog branched off, right? Because everything after the frog has 4 limbs, but the eel doesn't have 4 limbs. So I'm going to move this label and I'm going to label this space in between the frog and the eel. Sometime after the the eel branched off of our evolutionary tree, the trait of having 4 limbs evolved. And after that, the frog, the bunny, and the lemur branched off of our evolutionary tree. Okay. Then when I look at my next trait, the fur, well, fur seemed to have occurred somewhere between the frog and these two, because these two have fur, the frog doesn't. So I'm going to take my fur and I'm going to move it down here and put it in between where the frog branches off and where the bunny and the lemur branch off. Now, why wouldn't I put it right down here, right at the branch point? Well, I wouldn't do that because I don't know exactly when in between the time between the frog and the rabbit the fur developed. I just know it was sometime in between there. It wasn't at the branch point because the frog would have fur then, right? And so it has to be somewhere along this timeline in between when the frog branched off and when the rabbit branched off. All right, and then the long tail thing. Only the lemur has the long tail. So the trait of the long tail must have evolved sometime between the rabbit and the lemur. And now my cladogram is done. And I use this matrix to help me figure out which trait goes with which creature and how I'm going to organize them along this cladogram. Okay. And in this case, I'm just using my observations of the creatures to help me figure out if they have the trait or not. On some of the other slides that are in this practice, sometimes you might need to look a little closer at the creature. And if you do that, if you do need to do that, then you can click on the creature and then just make the picture bigger so that you can see them a little closer. And then you can just make it smaller again to put it back into its spot. All right, so hopefully that makes sense. I hope it all makes sense and works for you. You'll be able to do the practice a couple slides down.